"I can't go back there," she pleaded. "The Mafia boss said, then I'll burn that place down." The rain in Ravenshore did not wash things clean. It only seemed to make the grime on the sidewalks slicker, turning the city into a blurring watercolor of neon reds and deep, bruising purples. Inside the Silver Spoon Diner, the air smelled of stale coffee, frying grease, and the damp wool of the few patrons seeking refuge from the downpour. Elena Ward wiped the counter with a circular, rhythmic motion that she had perfected over the last 6 months. Small circles, big circles, erase the stains. If only it were that easy to erase everything else. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful sound that always made her muscles tense for a fraction of a second. She kept her head down, focusing on the laminate surface beneath her hands. She was good at being invisible. Being invisible was safe. It was a skill she had learned the hard way in a place she refused to name, even in the privacy of her own thoughts. A wash of bright white light flooded the front windows as a vehicle slowed down outside. Elena looked up instinctively. It was a large black SUV, its engine idling with a low, predatory rumble that vibrated against the glass. Her breath hitched in her throat. The rag in her hand stopped moving. For a moment, she was not in the diner. She was back in the driveway of the estate, surrounded by high walls and manicured gardens, watching similar black SUVs deliver guests who paid thousands of dollars for services that had nothing to do with wellness. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The SUV moved on, rolling slowly down the street, but the adrenaline remained, leaving a metallic taste in her mouth. "You are fine," she told herself. "You are Elena Ward. You are a waitress. You are free." The door opened again. The wind blew a spray of rain inside, followed by 4 men. The atmosphere in the diner shifted instantly. The low murmur of conversation in the back booth died out. The clatter of silverware from the kitchen seemed to grow louder in the sudden silence. These were not the usual late-night customers. They did not wear work boots or exhausted expressions. They wore long coats cut from expensive dark fabric that absorbed the light. They moved with a synchronized, quiet confidence that screamed of violence restrained only by choice. Elena gripped the counter, her knuckles turning white. She knew that walk. She knew that scent of cold rain mixed with expensive cologne and gun oil. It was the smell of power. The men moved to the large corner booth near the window, the one that offered a clear view of the street and the entrance. 3 of them sat down, while one remained standing near the edge of the table, his eyes scanning the room with professional paranoia. Elena forced her legs to move. She grabbed a pot of coffee and a stack of menus, her training kicking in. Serve the table. Be polite. Be invisible. As she approached, she kept her gaze fixed on the center of the table, avoiding their eyes. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We will take 4 black," one of the men said. He had a scar running through his eyebrow and a voice like gravel. As she poured, she felt eyes on her. Not the leering, hungry looks she sometimes got from the truck drivers, but something heavier, something that felt like a physical weight pressing against her skin. She risked a glance upward and froze. The man in the center of the booth was watching her. He was younger than the others, perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair slicked back from a face that was severe and strikingly handsome. He had the kind of stillness that predators possessed right before they struck. He was not looking at her uniform or her body. He was looking at her face, his dark eyes narrowing slightly with calm, assessing curiosity. This was Luca Moretti. She did not know his name yet, but she knew what he was. He was the kind of man who owned cities. "Here you go," Elena said, setting the pot down. She needed to get away from the table. She needed to get back to the kitchen, out the back door, and maybe run until her lungs burned. Luca watched her, his fingers drumming a silent rhythm on the table. "Thank you," he said. His voice was low, smooth, and terrified her more than the gravelly voice of his bodyguard. Elena turned to leave, clutching the empty tray against her chest like a shield. She was halfway to the kitchen when the world exploded. There was no warning, No shouting, just the sudden, deafening crack of automatic gunfire tearing through the front of the diner. The large plate glass window shattered inward, spraying the booth with a storm of jagged shards. "Down!" someone roared. Elena did not scream. Screamers died. That was the first lesson. She dropped to the floor, the ceramic tiles slamming against her knees. To her right, Sammy, the teenage dishwasher who had come out to collect plates, stood frozen in the middle of the aisle, his eyes wide with shock as the bullets chewed up the upholstery of the booths and decimated the pie display case. "Sammy!" Elena shouted. He did not move. He was just a kid, 16 years old, with acne and a dream of buying a used Honda. He was going to die right in front of her. Elena launched herself forward. She tackled Sammy around the waist, throwing her weight against him and driving them both to the floor behind the solid oak counter, just as a line of bullets stitched across the wall where his head had been a second ago. "Stay down," she hissed, pressing his face into the linoleum. "Cover your head." Glass rained down on them like diamonds. The noise was deafening. A continuous roar of gunfire and shouting. Elena curled her body over the boy, shielding him, making herself the target if the shooters came inside. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the burn of a bullet. The end of her short, stolen freedom. And then, as abruptly as it had begun, the shooting stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, ringing in her ears. Then came the groans of pain and the sound of tires screeching away on the wet asphalt. Elena waited a beat, 2 beats, counting her breaths. When no more shots followed, she lifted her head. "Stay here," she whispered to Sammy, whose shoulders were shaking violently. "Do not move until I tell you." She crawled to the edge of the counter and peered around. The diner was a ruin. Coffee pooled on the floor, mixing with rain and glass. In the corner booth, the men were moving. 2 of them were up, guns drawn, moving toward the shattered window. The man with the scar was shouting orders into a phone. Luca Moretti was still in the booth. He was sliding toward the edge of the seat, his face pale, his teeth gritted. His left hand was clamped over his right shoulder, and dark. Thick blood was pulsing between his fingers, soaking the fine fabric of his coat. "Boss, we have to go," one of the men said, reaching for him. "The cops will be here in 2 minutes." Luca swatted the hand away. "I can walk." He tried to stand, but his knees buckled. He stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the table. Elena was moving before she made the conscious decision to do so. She crossed the debris-strewn floor, ignoring the crunch of glass beneath her sneakers. "Do not move him yet," she commanded, her voice cutting through the panic. The bodyguard turned his gun toward her. "Back off, lady. Put that away," Luca rasped. Elena ignored the gun. She reached Luca and dropped to her knees beside him. She had seen wounds like this before. At the center. Accidents happened, guests got rough, girls got hurt. They had a fully stocked infirmary, and she had spent hours there, cleaning, bandaging, learning how to stop bleeding so the merchandise would not be damaged permanently. "Let me see," she said. She did not wait for his permission. Her hands, shaking only slightly, pushed his hand aside. She peeled back the ruined layers of his coat and shirt. The bullet had torn through the muscle of his shoulder. It was ugly, but it had missed the artery. "I need towels," she shouted at Sammy, who was peeking over the counter. "Clean ones now." The boy scrambled up and threw a stack of white dish towels toward her. Elena caught them. She folded one into a thick pad and pressed it directly onto the wound. Luca hissed in a breath, his body going rigid. "Sorry," she muttered, leaning her weight into the pressure. "I have to stop the bleeding or you will pass out before you get to the door." Luca looked down at her. The pain was radiating down his arm in waves of fire, but his mind was clearing. He focused on the woman kneeling in the glass. She was small, delicate-looking, with stray strands of brown hair escaping her messy bun, but her hands were firm. She knew exactly where to press. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice strained. Elena did not answer. She was watching the blood seep into the white cotton. It was slowing. "Hold this," she instructed, taking his good hand and placing it over the towel. "Keep the pressure tight. Do not let go." Up close. The smell of copper and rain was overwhelming. Elena looked up to check his pupils, to see if he was going into shock. That was when their eyes locked. His eyes were dark, almost black, and despite the pain, they held that same assessing intensity she had seen earlier. He was studying her wide, frightened eyes, her lips pressed tight into a line, the tension in her jaw. He was memorizing her. A car drove past outside, tires splashing through a puddle. The sound was loud, too loud in the broken quiet of the diner. Elena flinched violently. Her head snapped toward the shattered window. Through the jagged hole in the glass, she saw a black SUV idling at the intersection, illuminated by the street lamp. It was not the one the shooters had used. It was identical to the transport vans from the center. Panic, cold and absolute, washed over her. The diner dissolved, the smell of coffee vanished, replaced by the scent of antiseptic and lilies. "I cannot go back there," she whispered. The words slipped out before she could stop them. They were barely a breath, a plea to the universe. She stared out at the street. One of the shooters had been left behind, retreating on foot down the alleyway opposite the diner. The streetlight caught him for just a second. He was limping, holding his side. Elena saw the tattoo on his neck. A black sun with jagged rays. She knew that tattoo. She knew the man. He was a guard at the estate. He was the one who stood by the gate. The one who liked to use the cattle prod, her blood turned to ice. They were not shooting at Luca Moretti, or maybe they were. But that man belonged to her nightmare. They found me. She thought. The realization made her knees weak. Her hands, still resting near Luca's shoulder, went numb. She stared at the empty doorway where the glass used to be, terrified that the past itself was about to walk in and drag her back to the high walls and the locked rooms. "Elena?" The voice was deep and commanding. It cut through the fog of her panic. Luca saw the change in her. One moment she was the efficient medic. The next, she was a terrified animal. Her eyes dilated, her breathing shallow and fast. She was looking at the door as if a monster were standing there. He ignored the throbbing in his shoulder. He reached up with his good hand and wrapped his fingers around her wrist. His grip was not aggressive. It was grounding. His skin was warm, his hold steady. "Hey," he said, forcing her to look at him. Elena gasped, her eyes snapping back to his face. "Breathe," Luca ordered. His voice was quiet, intimate in the chaos. "Do not look at the door. Look at me." Elena focused on him, on the sharp line of his jaw, on the dark stubble. On the way, his thumb was pressing a steady rhythm against the pulse point of her wrist. "I know him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The man. The guard." "We have to move," the bodyguard with the scar shouted. "Sirens! I hear sirens." Police sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder with every second. Blue and red lights reflected off the wet pavement down the block. "Boss, now!" Luca did not let go of her wrist. He held her gaze for another second, anchoring her to the present. "What is your name?" he demanded. Elena blinked. She felt like she was floating. "Elena," she said. "Elena," Luca repeated, testing the weight of the word. He ran his thumb over the back of her hand, a touch that lingered far longer than necessary. It sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with fear. "We are leaving," Luca said. He allowed his men to pull him to his feet. He swayed, his face gray with pain, but he did not look away from her. "I will take care of the damage," he said. He was not talking about the window. He was looking at her, at the fear radiating off her, with an intensity she could not explain. It was a promise. "Go," the bodyguard urged, shoving Luca toward the back exit. They vanished into the rain and the shadows of the alley just as the first police cruiser skidded to a halt in front of the diner. Elena remained on her knees in the broken glass. She looked down at her hand, at the spot where his fingers had wrapped around her wrist. Ideally, she should be terrified. She'd just been in a shootout. The Halcyon group had found her. The police were storming in with flashlights and questions. But all she could feel was the phantom warmth of Luca's grip. The police kept them for 3 hours. Questions, statements. Elena told them everything and nothing. She described the shooters but left out the tattoo. She described the victims but did not give Luca's name. She said she did not know who they were, just customers, just wrong place, wrong time. She could not tell the police about the guard. If she admitted she recognized him, they would ask how. They would dig. They would find the missing person report from 6 months ago. They would call her parents, who had sold her to the center in the first place to pay off their gambling debts. No police, no paper trail. That was the rule. By the time they let her go, the rain had settled into a steady, freezing drizzle. The diner was taped off with yellow crime scene tape. Elena walked home alone. Her studio apartment was 6 blocks away, in a building that smelled of boiled cabbage and damp plaster. She hugged her thin coat tighter around her body. Every shadow looked like a man with a gun. Every car that passed made her heart stop. "I can't go back there," she whispered to the empty street. She replayed the moment in the diner. The man with the black sun tattoo. He had been there. He had been real. But then the memory shifted. She saw Luca's face. She felt the heavy, grounding pressure of his hand on her wrist. "Look at me." He had been bleeding. He had been in danger. Yet he had stopped to calm her down. She looked down at her hands. They were still stained with his blood, dried and dark in the creases of her knuckles. She should have washed it off at the station, but she hadn't. For months, she had felt like a leaf blowing in the wind, waiting to be crushed. Tonight, for the first time since her escape, someone had held on to her. The fear of the wellness center was a cold, sharp knife in her gut. But the memory of the Mafia boss, his eyes, his touch, his strange, quiet promise, felt like a shield. It made her uneasy. Men like him were dangerous. Men like him were the reason places like the center existed. And yet, as she turned the key in her triple-locked door and slid the deadbolt home, Elena realized that for a few seconds in that shattered diner, she had felt safer with a killer holding her wrist than she had ever felt on her own. She leaned her forehead against the door and closed her eyes, listening to the rain, terrified that tomorrow the black SUVs would come back, and equally terrified that she wanted the man with the dark eyes to come back with them. The morning sun did nothing to warm the chill that had settled deep in Elena Ward's bones. When she arrived at the diner, the glass had already been swept away, replaced by heavy sheets of plywood that darkened the interior. The air still smelled faintly of bleach and fear, a scent that made her stomach turn. Mr. Henderson, the owner, was behind the counter, staring at a thick envelope in his hands. He was a man who usually counted every penny twice, his face perpetually creased with worry about overhead costs and electricity bills. Today, however, he looked stunned, his mouth hanging slightly open. "Elena," he said, spotting her. He waved the envelope. "Look at this." Elena approached slowly, her sneakers squeaking on the clean floor. "What is it?" "A courier brought it an hour ago," he said. "Cash. Enough to replace the window 3 times over. And this." He slid a smaller, cream-colored envelope across the counter. It had her name written on it in heavy, slanted black ink. Elena stared at it. She knew that handwriting. She'd never seen it before last night, yet she knew it belonged to the man who had looked at her with eyes like dark water. Inside, there was another stack of bills, more money than she made in 2 months of double shifts. "Mr." Henderson said it was for lost tips, but the weight of the cash felt like a bribe, or an apology, or a leash. Clipped to the money was a small white card. It bore a phone number and a single line of text. In case they come back. Elena felt a jolt go through her chest. She stared at the initial L. Luca. She had heard his men say the name. She crumpled the card in her fist, the sharp edges digging into her palm. She should throw it away. She should burn it. Accepting help from a man like that was the first step toward a different kind of cage. She knew how these men operated. They gave you safety, and then they owned you. But as she moved toward the trash can, her hand stopped. The memory of the black sun tattoo on the shooter's neck flashed in her mind. They found me. Slowly, hating herself for it. She smoothed the card out against the counter. She folded it into a tiny square and tucked it deep into the pocket of her jeans, right against her hip, just in case. The shift dragged. Every time the door opened, Elena flinched. Every customer looked like a threat. By the time she clocked out, the sun had set and the rain had returned, turning Ravenshore into a slick, reflective maze of shadows. The walk home usually took 15 minutes. Elena walked fast, her head down, her hands shoved deep in her pockets. The streetlights hummed overhead, casting pools of sickly yellow light on the wet pavement, about 2 blocks from the diner. The feeling hit her. It was a prickle on the back of her neck, a sudden heaviness in the air. She was being watched. She did not turn around immediately. She kept her pace steady, listening. Beneath the sound of the rain and the distant city traffic, she heard the low, rolling purr of an engine. She turned the corner and glanced quickly over her shoulder. A gray sedan was creeping along the curb, matching her pace. It was nondescript, the windows tinted dark enough to hide the driver. Panic tightened her throat like a physical hand. They are here. Elena walked faster, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She cut through an alleyway that ran behind the old theater, hoping the car could not follow. Her boots splashed through puddles, soaking her socks. When she emerged on the other side, the sedan was there. It had circled the block. It was waiting. Elena began to run, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She needed to get to a public place, a gas station, a store, anywhere with people. The sedan accelerated. She could hear the tires hissing on the wet asphalt, getting closer. Suddenly, a roar cut through the night. A massive black shape surged out of a side street, cutting across the lanes with aggressive precision. It was an SUV, sleek and dark as a weapon. It slammed to a halt directly in the path of the gray sedan, blocking the road completely. Elena skidded to a stop, her chest heaving. She pressed herself against the wet brick wall of the nearest building, trembling. The driver's door of the SUV flew open. Luca Moretti stepped out. He looked different than he had in the diner. He wore a long, dark coat that swirled around his legs in the wind, and his expression was terrifying. It was not the calm, assessing look from the night before. This was cold, concentrated fury. He did not look at Elena. He marched toward the gray sedan. The sedan reversed so fast the tires smoked. The driver realized he had made a mistake, a fatal one. The car spun around in a desperate U-turn, scraping against the curb, and sped away into the darkness. Luca watched it go, his hands curled into fists at his sides. Only when the taillights had vanished did he turn toward the sidewalk. He found Elena pressed against the brick, water dripping from her hair, her eyes wide with terror. He approached her slowly, his hands held out slightly to show he was not reaching for a weapon. "Get in the car, Elena," he said. His voice was rough, cutting through the sound of the rain. Elena pushed herself off the wall. The fear that had been paralyzing her suddenly twisted into anger. It was a defensive reflex, the only way she knew how to keep from shattering. "You," she spat, her voice cracking. "You brought this. You brought them here." She gestured wildly at the empty street. "I was invisible. I was safe. Then you walked in, and now there are guns and cars following me and money in my pocket I do not want." Luca stopped a few feet away. He did not yell back. He stood in the rain, unmoving, letting her scream. His stillness was unnerving. When she finally ran out of breath, he reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a phone and tapped the screen, then turned it toward her. "Look," he said. Elena shook her head, backing away. "I do not want to see—" "Look at the photo, Elena." She froze. On the screen was a grainy, zoomed-in image of the gray sedan's license plate. Below it was a dossier. It was not a police file. It was private intelligence. "The car is registered to a shell company," Luca said, his voice devoid of emotion. North Star Logistics. The name meant nothing to her at first. But then Luca swiped to the next image. It was a corporate flow chart. North Star Logistics was a subsidiary of a larger holding company, the Halcyon Group. The world dropped out from under Elena's feet. The sound of the rain faded into a dull roar. Halcyon. It was not just a name. It was the smell of lavender and bleach. It was the sound of heavy locks clicking shut. It was the smile of Victor Hale as he told her she was special. Her legs gave out. She did not stumble. She simply collapsed. She slid down the rough brick wall, landing hard on the wet pavement. Her hands covered her mouth to stifle a sob that felt like it might tear her throat open. "Elena!" Luca closed the distance instantly. He crouched in front of her, his expensive coat trailing in the muddy water. He did not grab her. He placed his hands on the ground on either side of her legs, creating a barrier, a shelter. Rain beaded on his dark hair and ran down the sharp planes of his face. His shoulder, the one that had been shot, was stiff, but he ignored it. "Elena," he said softly, "look at me." She shook her head, burying her face in her knees. I cannot go back." He reached out then, slowly, carefully. He brushed a strand of wet hair away from her cheek. His knuckles grazed her skin, warm and rough. "What is Halcyon to you?" he asked. The question was gentle, but it demanded an answer. He needed to know the enemy. Elena looked up. Her face was streaked with rain and tears. She looked at this man, this criminal, this king of a violent world, and she saw the only thing standing between her and the void. "If they take me," she whispered, her voice broken, "I will not come back. I will die before I let them touch me again." Lucas stared at her, his jaw flexed. A muscle jumped in his cheek. He saw the truth in her eyes. This was not just fear of death. This was fear of something much worse. He stood up, extending a hand down to her. "You are not going back," he said. The fury was gone from his voice, replaced by a deadly, absolute certainty. "I am taking you somewhere safe." "Where?" she asked, staring at his hand. "Somewhere no one can find you, not even Halcyon, especially not Halcyon." Elena hesitated. She knew she should run. Getting into his car was crossing a line. It was entering the underworld. But looking at the empty street where the gray sedan had been, she knew she had no choice. She took his hand, he pulled her up, his grip firm, and led her to the black SUV. The drive was silent. Elena sat in the passenger seat, shivering uncontrollably. Luca turned up the heat until the air was thick and warm. He drove with one hand on the wheel, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors. They left the city center, heading toward the outskirts where the houses were larger and the driveways were gated. Luca pulled up to a townhouse that looked like all the others on the block. Brick. Respectable. Quiet. But as he unlocked the front door, Elena noticed the thickness of the wood, the steel frame, the keypad alarm system that he disarmed with a rapid sequence of numbers. This was a fortress disguised as a home. Inside. The house was warm and dim. It smelled of cedar and leather. Elena stood in the foyer, dripping water onto the expensive hardwood floor. She looked down at her thrift store jacket, her worn sneakers, her jeans with the frayed hem. She felt small. She felt dirty. She was a stray cat dragged into a palace. Luca locked the door behind them. He threw the deadbolt with a heavy thud that echoed in the silence. "There are clothes in the upstairs bedroom," he said, hanging his coat on the rack. He winced slightly as he moved his injured shoulder. "The bathroom is through the hall. Take a shower, warm up." Elena stood frozen. "Why are you doing this?" Luca paused. He looked at her. Really looked at her, stripping away the layers of her defense. "Because you saved my life," he said simply, "and I pay my debts." He turned and walked toward the kitchen. An hour later, Elena came downstairs. She was wearing a pair of sweatpants and a soft gray t-shirt she had found in a drawer. They were too big for her, swallowing her frame. She had scrubbed her skin until it was pink, trying to wash away the feeling of the gray sedan. She found Luca in the kitchen. He had taken off his dress shirt and was wearing a simple black t-shirt that showed the fresh bandage on his shoulder. He was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of pasta sauce. The domesticity of the scene was jarring. A mafia boss cooking marinara sauce in a townhouse with steel doors? "Sit," he said, nodding toward the island counter. Elena sat. She watched him cook. He moved with the same precision he used for everything else, efficient, controlled. "Why do you not have a chef?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "I do not like strangers in my house," he said. He plated the food, pasta with red sauce and fresh basil, and set a bowl in front of her. It was simple, rustic, and smelled incredible. "Eat," he commanded gently. They ate in silence for a few minutes. The food warmed Elena from the inside, settling the nausea that had been churning in her stomach all day. "You were a medic?" Luca asked, breaking the silence. "In the diner, you knew what you were doing." Elena froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. "I learned some things." "Where?" "At the spa." She said the word with a bitter twist. "The place you escaped from," Luca stated. It was not a question. Elena put her fork down. It was a wellness center. For rich people, high fees, exclusive membership. They had doctors, nurses. Everything looked perfect. She looked at her hands, but the doors only opened from the outside. The guests could do whatever they wanted, and the staff. "We belonged to the house." She stopped. She could not tell him the rest. The sounds at night, the way they were traded like livestock, the things she had to patch up in the infirmary because calling an ambulance was forbidden. It smelled expensive, she whispered. Everything was silk and marble. But it was a cage. Luca stopped eating. He watched her, his dark eyes absorbing every tremor in her voice. He did not press her for details. He did not offer empty platitudes. "I know what a cage feels like," he said quietly. Elena looked at him. You are the one holding the keys." Luca gave a humorless smile. "I was born into this. Elena. My father was the boss. His father was the boss. When I was 10 years old, I was taught how to clean a gun before I was taught how to do long division." He leaned back, picking up his glass of wine. "I did not choose this life. It was built around me, brick by brick, before I was old enough to know there was anything else." He looked at the steel-reinforced door. "Sometimes the cage is made of gold, but it is still a cage." Elena stared at him. For the first time, she saw beneath the suit and the reputation. She saw a man who was just as trapped as she was, only his prison was made of loyalty and blood instead of iron bars. They finished the meal in a different kind of silence. It was heavier, but less fearful. It was the silence of two people recognizing the scars on each other's souls. "I will take the couch," Luca said as he cleared the plates. "You take the bed upstairs. It is secure. No one can get in." Elena nodded. "Thank you." She went upstairs, but sleep was a distant hope. The bed was huge, the sheets soft, but the silence of the safe house was deafening. Every creak of the house settling sounded like a footstep. She finally drifted off around 2 a.m. Exhausted by adrenaline, the nightmare came instantly. She was back at Halcyon. The air smelled of lavender. The door was opening. Victor was there, smiling, holding a leash. The black sun tattoo was swimming in front of her eyes. Hands were grabbing her ankles, dragging her across the polished marble floor. She was screaming, but no sound was coming out. No. She woke up with a gasp that tore through her throat. She was sitting upright, her fingers clawing at the sheets, her heart hammering so hard it hurt. She was drenched in sweat. The bedroom door flew open. Luca was there instantly. He had a gun in his hand, pointed low, his eyes scanning the room for a threat. He saw her sitting on the bed, shaking, her eyes unseeing, trapped in the terror of the dream. He lowered the gun and set it on the dresser. He moved slowly, showing his hands. "Elena," he said softly, "you are safe. You are here." He was wearing sweatpants and a loose t-shirt. His hair was mussed from sleep, his eyes heavy but alert. Elena looked at him, trying to separate the dream from reality. She saw the silhouette of his shoulders, the solid presence of him in the doorway. She pulled her knees to her chest, trembling. "I saw them," she choked out. "I felt them." Luca stayed by the door. He did not rush to her. He did not invade her space. He stood there, a sentinel in the dark, giving her the agency she had been denied for so long. "Do you want me to leave?" he asked. The question hung in the air. Elena looked at the empty corners of the room. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist. If he left, the darkness would swallow her again. "Don't leave," she whispered. Luca nodded. He stepped closer. He sat on the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance. The mattress dipped under his weight. He did not touch her at first. He just sat there, breathing steadily, letting his presence be an anchor. Elena slowly uncurled her legs. She shifted toward him. She needed to feel something real. She needed to know that she was not back in that marble room. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his back. Luca stiffened for a second, then relaxed. He could feel her shaking against him. Slowly, he reached back. His hand found the center of her back. He began to rub it in long, slow circles, up and down her spine. A rhythmic, reassuring motion. "Breathe," he murmured. "Just breathe." The heat of his body radiated through his shirt. It was grounding, real. The smell of him, cedar and rain, chased away the phantom scent of lavender. Elena's breathing began to match his. The panic receded, leaving her exhausted and raw. She pulled back slightly, and Luca turned to face her. They were sitting inches apart in the semi-darkness. The moonlight filtering through the blinds painted stripes across their faces. Elena looked up at him. His eyes were searching hers, checking for cracks. She reached up, her hand hovering, then touching his cheek. Her fingers were cold against his skin. She traced the line of his jaw, the rough stubble scratching her fingertips. Luca closed his eyes for a moment, leaning into her touch. It was a gesture of such profound trust that it made his chest ache. When he opened his eyes again, the air between them had changed. It was charged, heavy. His gaze dropped to her mouth. Her lips were parted slightly, her breath hitching. He wanted to kiss her. The urge was a physical pull, magnetic and undeniable. He wanted to pull her into him and erase every bad memory she had with the sheer force of his own existence. He leaned in. Their cheeks brushed. Her skin was soft, damp with tears and sweat. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She waited, her body tense, not with fear, but with anticipation. But Luca stopped. He pulled back just an inch, his jaw flexed, the muscles tight with restraint. He looked at her, his eyes dark and burning with an intensity that terrified and thrilled her. He could take what he wanted. Men like him always took. But he was not them. "You get to choose everything now." "Elena," he murmured, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. Even this, he did not pull away, but he did not close the gap. He left the space there, open and waiting. Elena stared at him, her chest heaving. The frustration was a sharp pang, but beneath it was something else. Safety. Absolute, terrified safety. For the first time in her life, a man was asking. She did not kiss him. She was not ready. But she did not pull away either. She settled back against the pillows, and Luca lay down on top of the covers beside her, facing the door, his hand resting protectively near hers. "Go to sleep," he whispered. I am right here, and for the first time in 6 months." Elena closed her eyes and slept without dreaming. The safe house was a fortress of silence in a city that never stopped screaming. For 3 days, Elena Ward had lived within its walls, pacing the length of the hardwood floors until the pattern of the grain was etched into her memory. The windows were reinforced, treated with a film that made it impossible to see in from the street. But that did not stop Elena from flinching every time a pair of headlights swept across the glass. She felt like a ghost haunting a stranger's life. Luca came and went with the unpredictability of a storm. He would disappear for hours, sometimes an entire day, and return with the smell of city rain and stale tobacco clinging to his coat. He never told her where he went, and she never asked. But every time he returned, he brought pieces of a puzzle that was slowly forming a picture of her nightmare. On the 4th evening, he threw a thick manila folder onto the coffee table. "I found it," he said. Elena sat on the edge of the oversized leather sofa, her hands tucked between her knees. She looked at the folder but did not touch it. "What is it?" she asked. "The place," Luca said. He walked to the sideboard and poured himself a drink, his movements sharp and agitated. "It is called Ridgefield Wellness Retreat." The name sent a shiver down Elena's spine that had nothing to do with the draft in the room. Ridgefield. It sounded so benign, so peaceful. "It is 40 miles north," Luca continued, turning to face her. Private land ringed by 2,000 acres of dense forest, one access road, armed security disguised as park rangers. Elena closed her eyes. She could see the trees. She could smell the pine needles that masked the scent of despair. "I know," she whispered. "I remember the drive. I remember the trees blocking out the sky." Luca watched her, his glass suspended halfway to his mouth. He looked tired. The shadows under his eyes were bruised purple, and the tension in his shoulders never seemed to fully release. He sat down opposite her, pushing the folder closer. "It is not just a retreat. Elena, it is a fortress, and it is connected to everything." She reached out and opened the folder. The first photograph made her breath hitch. It was an aerial shot of the main house, a sprawling colonial estate with white pillars and manicured lawns. It looked like a postcard for the American dream. But Elena knew what lay beneath the guest house. She knew what happened in the soundproofed rooms of the East Wing. He is building a case, she realized, not for the police, for a war. The next afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was not the chiming bell of a normal home, but a low buzz that signaled someone was at the gate. Elena retreated to the top of the stairs, sitting in the shadows of the landing. She heard the heavy thud of the front door opening and the murmur of low voices. It was Marco. She recognized the lieutenant's voice from the diner, rough, impatient, the voice of a man who solved problems with a tire iron. "This is madness." "Luca," Marco was saying. His voice carried up the stairwell, echoing off the high ceilings. "Keep your voice down," Luca replied, his tone icy. "I am serious, boss. We are bleeding money on this. The shipment from the docks is stalled because you have us watching a girl instead of the union reps. And now you are poking at Halcyon?" There was the sound of heavy boots pacing the foyer. "Halcyon is a partner. Luca." A silent one. "Sure. But the money they funnel through the laundry mats is clean. It is consistent. You are talking about burning down a profitable truce for a waitress." Elena gripped the banister, her knuckles turning white. A profitable truce. That was what she was worth. That was what her suffering amounted to. A line item on a ledger, a rounding error in a criminal enterprise. She held her breath, waiting for Luca's response. She expected him to agree. She expected him to say that business was business. They crossed a line, Luca said. His voice was low, but it carried a weight that stopped Marco's pacing. "Lines get crossed every day," Marco argued. "We cross them. That is the job. Since when do you grow a conscience over one civilian? Since I decided to—" Luca snapped. "The conversation is over. Marco, keep the men on the perimeter. If I see a single Halcyon scout within a mile of this house, I want to know—" There was a long silence, followed by the sound of the door opening and slamming shut. Elena let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. She leaned her head against the wooden railing, squeezing her eyes shut. Luca was risking everything. His empire, his standing with his men, his money for her. The realization settled in her chest like a stone. It was a heavy, suffocating mix of gratitude and guilt. She wanted him to stop before he got hurt. She wanted him to burn the whole world down for her. The contradiction made her head spin. 2 days later, Luca drove her to a medical clinic on the west side of the city. He insisted she needed a checkup, to make sure the adrenaline and stress hadn't done any lasting damage, and to get a prescription for the nightmares that left her screaming every night. He waited in the car. It was too dangerous for him to be seen sitting in a waiting room. He said, Elena walked into the sterile building alone. The smell of antiseptic hit her instantly, making her stomach turn. It reminded her of the infirmary at Ridgefield. She checked in and sat in the corner of the waiting room, pulling the collar of her coat up to hide her face. "Excuse me." The voice was soft, professional. Elena looked up. A man in a gray suit was standing over her. He looked unremarkable in every way. Brown hair, average height, forgettable face, but his eyes were sharp, devoid of any warmth. "Miss Ward?" he asked. Elena stiffened. "I am not—" "We know who you are, Elena. And we know who is waiting for you in the black SUV outside." Elena stood up, her heart hammering. "I am leaving." The man stepped into her path. He did not touch her, but he blocked her exit with practiced ease. I am Agent Miller, FBI. He held up a badge, just for a second, then tucked it away. We know about Ridgefield. Elena. We have been building a file on the Halcyon Group for 3 years. We know about the trafficking, the money laundering, the politicians they blackmail. Elena stared at him. Then why are they still open? Why are they still taking girls? Because we need a witness, Miller said. We need someone who has been inside. Someone who can point the finger at Victor Hale and make it stick. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a plain white card with a number on it. Help us. Elena, testify. If you come to us, we can put you in protection. Real protection, not a mob boss playing hero who will eventually trade you to save his own skin. Elena took the card. Her fingers trembled. Witness. The word felt like a target painted on her forehead. Think about it, Miller said. He stepped back, melting into the crowd of patients as if he had never been there. The drive back to the safe house was silent. Elena clutched the card in her pocket, the edges digging into her palm. When they got inside, the tension finally snapped. Luca was in the kitchen pouring a glass of water. He looked at her, sensing the shift in her mood. What happened? He asked. Elena pulled the card out and threw it on the counter. The FBI approached me, she said. They know about Ridgefield. They want me to testify. Luca picked up the card. He looked at it, then looked at her, his face darkening. You cannot talk to them. Why not? Elena demanded. Her voice rose, fueled by days of confinement and fear. They are the law, Luca. They can shut it down legally. They can put Victor Hale in prison where he belongs. The law? Luca laughed. A harsh, bitter sound. The law has known about Halcyon for years. Who do you think keeps the zoning permits approved for Ridgefield? Who do you think tips them off before a raid? The system is broken, Elena. It feeds on people like you. And what is your solution? Elena shouted. She took a step toward him, her anger overriding her fear. You want to go to war? You want to kill them? How does that make you any better than them? I am not claiming to be better, Luca shot back, slamming his hand down on the counter. The sound made the silverware rattle. I am claiming to be effective. If you testify, you will be dead within a week. They will get to you in protective custody. They will get to you in a courtroom. You do not know that. I do know that. Luca roared. He moved around the island, closing the distance between them. I know because I have bought those judges myself. I have paid those cops. If you go to them, you are signing your own death warrant. So what? Elena cried, tears springing to her eyes. At least I would be trying to do the right thing. At least I would not be hiding in a gangster's house waiting for the world to explode. Is that what you think this is? Luca asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think I am doing this for fun? I am risking everything to keep you breathing. I never asked you to. You did not have to. They were standing inches apart now, breathing hard, the air between them crackling with electricity. You just want revenge, Elena accused, jabbing a finger at his chest. You want to destroy a rival. Do not pretend this is about me. Luca grabbed her hand, stopping her. His grip was hard, desperate. It is entirely about you, he said, his eyes burning into hers. And that is what terrifies me. Elena opened her mouth to respond, to scream, to cry. She didn't know which, but she never got the chance. The front window of the living room exploded. There was no sound at first, just the violent inward shower of glass. Then came the roar of the engine and the staccato crack, crack, crack of automatic weapons fire. Bullets tore through the plaster, shredding the curtains and punching holes in the drywall. Vases shattered. The lamp on the side table disintegrated. Luca did not hesitate. He did not think. He moved. He tackled Elena, wrapping his arms around her waist and throwing her to the floor behind the heavy oak sofa. Get down, he shouted, his voice lost in the noise of destruction. He covered her body with his own, shielding her from the debris. Elena curled into a ball, her face pressed against the hardwood floor. She could feel the heavy thud of bullets impacting the furniture above them. Dust and plaster rained down on Luca's back. She felt his heartbeat against her spine. It was a hard, frantic drum, beating in time with her own. The shooting lasted for 10 seconds, but it felt like 10 years. Then, tires screeched, and the engine roared away into the night. Silence rushed back into the room. Heavy and ringing, Elena lay frozen, her eyes squeezed shut. She could smell the sharp, metallic scent of ozone and cordite. She could smell the dust, and she could smell Luca, sandalwood, sweat, and fear. "Are you hit?" Luca asked. His voice was right in her ear, rough and breathless. Elena shook her head against the floor. No, I am okay." Luca shifted, lifting his weight off her slightly, but keeping his arm pinned across her back to keep her down. He scanned the room, looking for a second attack. "We are clear," he whispered. He rolled off her and sat up, leaning back against the shredded remains of the sofa. He ran a hand through his hair, shaking out plaster dust. Elena sat up slowly. Her hands were shaking so hard she had to clasp them together. She looked at the wall opposite them. It was pockmarked with bullet holes. Sunlight from the street lamp outside streamed through the shattered window, illuminating the destruction. "They found us," she whispered. Luca looked at her. His face was smeared with dust, and there was a small cut on his cheekbone where a shard of glass had grazed him. "They are trying to scare us," he said. "If they wanted us dead, they would have used a rocket. This was a message." He looked at Elena, and his expression crumbled. The anger from their argument was gone, replaced by a raw, naked relief. "You are okay," he said, reaching out to touch her arm. Elena looked at him. She looked at the man who had just used his own body as a shield for hers, the man who had taken a bullet for her in a diner, the man who was currently bleeding from a dozen tiny glass cuts because he had covered her. The adrenaline that had been flooding her veins suddenly shifted. It turned from fear into something else, something hot and desperate. She reached out. Her hand trembled as she touched his face. Her fingers traced the rough stubble along his jawline, feeling the tension in the muscle there. She moved her thumb over the small, white scar near the corner of his mouth. Luca went still. He closed his eyes, leaning into her palm. He let out a long, shuddering breath, as if he had been holding it for a lifetime. It was the first gentle thing he had felt in years. When he opened his eyes, they were dark with a hunger that had nothing to do with violence. "Elena," he breathed. He didn't move, waiting for her, giving her the choice. Elena made it. She leaned forward, closing the small distance between them. Their mouths met in a sudden, fierce collision. It was not a movie kiss. It was desperate. It tasted of dust and fear and the iron tang of blood from his cut lip. It was the kiss of two people who had just realized how fragile their lives were. Luca groaned low in his throat. His hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing over her cheekbones, wiping away the dust. He was rough, his grip possessive, but Elena did not pull away. She gripped the back of his neck, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer. She felt the flex of his shoulders beneath her palms, the solid, unyielding strength of him. For months, she had felt like she was made of glass, waiting to shatter. But against him, she felt solid. The kiss deepened, becoming a pouring out of weeks of tension, anger, and unspoken need. Luca shifted, pressing her back against the floor, his body heavy and warm over hers. His hand trailed down from her cheek. It moved over the sensitive skin of her throat, down her shoulder, and rested on the curve of her waist. Elena stiffened. It was a reflex. A split-second freeze born of 6 months in a room where touch was never a choice. Her breath hitched and her muscles locked up. Luca felt it instantly. He stopped. He did not pull away, but he went completely still. He pulled his lips from hers, hovering just an inch away. His breathing was ragged, harsh in the quiet room. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. He waited for her panic to subside, his hand on her waist remaining perfectly still, applying no pressure. "I am here," he whispered. "I am not him. I am not them." Elena let out a shaky breath. She opened her eyes and saw him, not a monster, not a captor. "Just Luca. I know," she whispered back. She relaxed beneath him, but the moment for fire had passed. Now, there was only the embers, glowing warm and steady. They sat there on the floor of the ruined living room for a long time, clothes still on, bodies pressed together. They did not speak. They just breathed, sharing the same air, letting the desire simmer between them without pushing it further than she was ready to go. It was the most intimate moment of Elena's life. Later that night, the wind blew through the boarded-up window, whistling a mournful tune. Elena was asleep on the couch, wrapped in a thick wool blanket. Her head was resting on Luca's lap. One of her hands was curled loosely around his fingers. Luca was awake. He stared at the bullet-scarred wall opposite him. The shadows danced in the flickering light of a single candle he had lit. He traced idle circles on the back of Elena's hand with his thumb. He looked at her face, relaxed in sleep, the lines of worry finally smoothed out. She had asked him if he wanted revenge. She had asked if he was just a criminal protecting his pride. He looked at the destruction around them. He thought of the agent in the gray suit trying to use her as bait. He thought of Marco calling her a profitable truce. He thought of the men who had fired blindly into a house where she was sleeping. Halcyon had to go. Not just the business, not just the leadership. All of it. Every stone, every dollar. Every person who profited from the cage they had put her in. And that included the rot in his own organization. Luca's expression hardened into something carved from granite. He gently squeezed Elena's hand. "I will burn it down," he promised silently to the sleeping woman. "I will burn it all down so you never have to look over your shoulder again." He leaned his head back and waited for the dawn, planning a war that would leave nothing but ash in its wake. The paper trail was thin, barely a whisper in the static of the underworld's economy. But Luca Moretti knew how to listen to whispers. He sat in the private office of a shell corporation downtown, a room that smelled of dust and stale air. Staring at a stack of printed ledgers, the numbers did not lie. They painted a picture of betrayal so intimate it felt like a knife twisting between his ribs. For 3 days, he had been hunting the money that funded Halcyon. He expected to find rival syndicates. He expected to find corrupt politicians or overseas investors. He did not expect to find his own last name staring back at him from the transaction logs. Moretti Imports, the construction firm his cousin ran, the logistics company overseen by his uncle, Salvatore, they were not just looking the other way, they were partners. Ridgefield Wellness Retreat was not merely a customer of the family's protection racket, it was a pillar of their financial stability. The Halcyon Group paid the Moretti family nearly $400,000 a month in consulting fees. In exchange, the Moretti family ensured that no inspectors, no police, and no nosy journalists ever made it past the front gates of the estate. Luca closed the folder. The leather cover made a soft, final sound in the quiet room. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gray skyline of Ravenshore. He had been protecting Elena from the monsters outside, never realizing that the monsters were sitting at his own Sunday dinner table. The meeting with Salvatore took place in the back room of a cigar bar in Little Italy. It was neutral ground, or as neutral as it could be when family was involved. Salvatore sat in a plush leather armchair, a glass of cognac in one hand and a cigar in the other. He was a man of 60, with silver hair and the kind of grandfatherly smile that hid a heart made of calculation and ice. "You look tired, Luca," Salvatore said, gesturing to the empty chair opposite him. "You are chasing ghosts." "I am not chasing ghosts," Luca said. He remained standing. "I am chasing a partnership I did not authorize." Salvatore sighed, a long exhale of smoke that drifted toward the tin ceiling tiles. "Halcyon is good business. Luca, stable, quiet. They provide leverage. Do you know how many senators send their wives or mistresses to Ridgefield to dry out? That information is worth more than gold. They traffic women." "Salvatore," Luca said. His voice was low, devoid of the respect he usually showed his elder. "They kidnap them, they break them, and we are taking a cut of the profits." Salvatore shrugged, a motion that dismissed the suffering of hundreds of human beings as a minor accounting detail. "We provide security. What they do inside their walls is their business. We do not legislate morality. Luca, we provide order. I am shutting it down." Luca said. Salvatore stopped. He set his glass down on the small mahogany table. The grandfatherly warmth evaporated, leaving behind the eyes of a shark. "You will do no such thing," he said softly. "The alliances are fragile. Luca, if you touch Ridgefield, you upset the ecosystem. The Russians use it. The Irish use it. You burn that place, and you turn the entire city against us." "I do not care," Luca said. "You should, because if you proceed with this crusade for a girl you found in a diner, the family will not support you. In fact, the family will be forced to remove the problem." Luca stepped closer, his hands loose at his sides, ready for violence. "Are you threatening me, Uncle?" "I am educating you," Salvatore replied calmly. "The girl is a temporary problem. She's damaged goods, a liability. The smart move, the move your father would have made, is to return her." Luca felt a chill wash over him that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Return her. As if Elena were a defective shipment of television sets. "Victor Hale is a reasonable man," Salvatore continued, picking up his drink again. "He wants his property back. We give him the girl. He forgets the damage to his reputation, and the money keeps flowing. Everybody wins, except her." Luca said, "She is nobody. Luca. She is a waitress. Wake up." Luca turned and walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the brass handle. "If you touch her," he said, not looking back, "if any of you touch her, I will forget that we share blood." Salvatore chuckled darkly. "Be careful, nephew. A king who rules with his heart usually ends up with a knife in it." When Luca returned to the safe house, the atmosphere shifted the moment he walked through the door. Elena was sitting on the floor in the living room, repairing the hem of her jeans with a needle and thread she had found. She looked up, and the smile that had started to form on her lips died instantly. She saw the darkness on him. It was heavy, a suffocating aura of rage and despair. "What happened?" she asked, standing up. Luca walked past her to the kitchen. He needed water. He needed whiskey. He needed to wash the sound of his uncle's voice out of his head. "Nothing," he said. "Do not lie to me," Elena said. She followed him. "You walk in here looking like you just buried someone. What did you find?" Luca gripped the edge of the granite counter. He looked at her. He saw the bruise fading on her cheek. He saw the way she stood, fierce and terrified all at once. "My family," he said, his voice raspy. "My uncle. They are protected by my own people. Elena." Elena went still. "What does that mean?" "It means," Luca said, turning to face her, "that Ridgefield pays us. It means that for years, while you were trapped in that place, the money you made for them was ending up in my family's pockets." He saw the color drain from her face. She looked as if he had struck her. "You?" she whispered. "Not me," Luca said quickly, stepping forward. "I did not know. I swear to you, Elena, I did not know. But Salvatore, he knows. He set it up. He wants to send you back," Luca added, the words tasting like ash. "He told me to return you, to fix the alliance." Elena took a step back. She bumped into the island. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter to keep her upright. "Your own people want to give me to them? Yes. Then I am dead," she said. Her voice was flat. "No," Luca said fiercely. "I told him no. I told him I would burn the city down first, but they will not stop, will they?" Elena looked at him, her eyes wide and unblinking. "If you fight them, you fight your own family. You lose everything, your soldiers, your money, your life." "I do not care about the money," Luca said. "But I do," Elena cried. "I care about your life." She paced the small kitchen, her hands shaking. "You are going to die for me," she said. "That is how this ends. Salvatore will kill you to get to me, or Victor Hale will kill you, and I will be the reason the great Luca Moretti falls." Luca grabbed her shoulders, stopping her pacing. "Stop it. You are not a liability. You are the only thing in this world that makes sense to me right now." He pulled her into him, wrapping his arms around her rigid frame. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. "We will figure it out," he whispered. "I have men. Loyal men, Marco, Leo. We will strike first." Elena stood stiff in his arms. She let him hold her. She let him promise her safety. But in her mind, she heard Salvatore's voice through Luca's description. She saw the inevitability of the math. One girl against an empire. Later that night, when Luca finally fell into a restless sleep on the couch, his gun within arm's reach on the floor, Elena made a choice. She moved silently through the dark house. She found the card Agent Miller had given her. It was wrinkled, the corners soft from where she had clenched it in her pocket. She went to the prepaid burner phone Luca had left on the counter. She dialed the number. It rang once. Miller, a voice said. "I am ready," Elena whispered. "Good," Miller said. "Where are you? I cannot tell you, but I can meet you." "There is a parking garage on 4th and Main," Miller said. "Top level. 1 hour. Come alone. If we see a single Moretti soldier, the deal is off." "I will be alone," Elena said. She hung up. She looked at Luca one last time. He looked younger when he slept, the lines of stress smoothing out. She wanted to kiss him. She wanted to wake him up and beg him to run away with her. But kings did not run. They fought until they died, and she loved him enough to make sure he did not have to fight for her. She wrote a note on a napkin. "I will not let you burn for me." Then she slipped out the back door and into the rain. The parking garage was a concrete cavern of shadows and echoes. The wind whistled through the open sides, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and city grit. Elena walked up the ramp to the top level. Her sneakers made no sound on the concrete. She was shivering, partly from the cold, partly from the terrifying certainty that she was making a mistake. The top level was empty except for a single white sedan parked under a flickering light. Elena slowed down. She scanned the area. "Agent Miller?" she called out. The door of the sedan opened, but it was not Miller who stepped out. It was a man in a black tactical vest and a ski mask. Elena froze. Behind her, tires screeched. A black van surged up the ramp, cutting off her retreat. The side door slid open before the vehicle even came to a complete stop. 2 men jumped out. They moved with the efficiency of professionals. Elena turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. "No!" she screamed. One of the men grabbed her from behind, his arm clamped around her waist, lifting her feet off the ground. "Luca!" she screamed, the name tearing from her throat before a heavy cloth was pressed over her mouth. The smell of chloroform was chemical and sweet, but she held her breath, fighting, kicking. Her heel connected with a shin. The man grunted but did not let go. They dragged her toward the van. This was not the FBI. This was the fix. This was Salvatore cleaning up the mess. They threw her onto the floor of the van. Someone zip-tied her wrists behind her back. A black bag was shoved over her head, plunging her into darkness. As the van sped away, Elena stopped fighting. Not because she surrendered, but because she needed to save her air. She lay on the vibrating metal floor, listening to the men speak in low, clipped Italian. She had tried to save him, and in doing so, she had walked right back into hell. Luca woke up to silence, a heavy, absolute silence that felt wrong. "Elena?" he called out. No answer. He sat up, his hand automatically finding his gun. He moved to the stairs. "Elena!" He checked the bedroom. Empty. The bathroom. Empty. He ran downstairs to the kitchen. He saw the back door unlocked, swaying slightly in the wind, and then he saw the napkin on the counter. "I will not let you burn for me." The roar that came out of him was primal. He swept the items off the counter with a violent swing of his arm. Glass shattered. The coffee maker crashed to the floor. He grabbed his phone and dialed Marco. "Where are you?" Luca demanded. "I'm at the warehouse." "Boss, what is wrong? Get the men, get everyone, meet me at the safe house. Now." 10 minutes later, the dining room of the safe house was full of armed men. They looked nervous. They'd never seen their boss like this. Luca was not yelling. He was terrifyingly quiet. The veins in his neck were standing out like cords, and his eyes were void of anything human. He slammed his gun onto the mahogany table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "She is gone," Luca said. The men exchanged glances. "She left to meet the feds." Luca said, "But she never made it. I just got a call from a contact at the precinct. Miller never saw her." He looked around the room, making eye contact with every lieutenant. Someone told Salvatore where she was going. Someone intercepted her. No one spoke. Luca walked around the table. He stopped behind Marco. You were the only one who knew she was here. Marco. You and me. Marco went pale. Boss, I swear. Do not lie to me, Luca roared. He grabbed Marco by the collar and slammed him against the wall. A picture frame crashed to the floor. Did you tell Salvatore? Did you sell her out? Marco choked, clawing at Luca's hand. Salvatore. He said it was for the family. He said if we let her go to the feds, we all go to jail. I just told him she was spooked. I did not know he would take her. Luca punched him. It was a brutal, efficient blow that split Marco's lip and sent him crumbling to the floor. Luca stood over him, chest heaving. He raised his boot, ready to stomp the life out of the man who had been his right hand for 10 years. Please. Luca, Marco gasped, spitting blood. He said he was just going to talk to her. He gave her to Halcyon. Luca screamed. He gave her back to the butchers. He pulled his gun and pointed it at Marco's head. Give me a reason not to paint this wall with your brains. Marco looked up, tears mixing with the blood on his face. I know where the intake facility is. I know the route they take to Ridgefield. I can get us through the gate. Luca stared at him. The hammer of the gun was cocked. His finger twitched on the trigger. He wanted to kill him. He wanted to kill everyone in the room. But killing Marco would not get Elena back. Get up, Luca hissed. Marco scrambled to his feet, swaying. You are going to drive, Luca said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. And if you hesitate, if you flinch, if you look at me wrong, I will kill you slowly. We are going to Ridgefield, and we are going to kill everyone who stands in our way. The van ride was an eternity. Elena lay in the dark, the smell of the floor mat, oil and dirt, mixing with the expensive cologne of the man guarding her. It was a familiar smell, sandalwood and citrus. It smelled like the guests at the parties. Panic tried to claw its way up her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The darkness of the hood brought back the memories she had fought so hard to bury. The sound of the heavy door locking, the footsteps in the hallway, the feeling of being an object. I cannot go back, she thought. I cannot. She focused on the pain in her wrists, the sharp bite of the plastic tie. Pain was real. Pain meant she was still alive. She thought of Luca. She thought of his hand on her back, rubbing circles into her spine. She thought of the way he had looked at her in the moonlight, like she was something precious, not something to be used. I will not break, she whispered into the gag. I will not break. The van slowed down. Gravel crunched under the tires. The vehicle stopped. The doors opened. Hands grabbed her, pulling her out into the cool night air. She smelled pine trees. Ridgefield, they pulled the hood off. Elena blinked against the sudden flood of light. She was standing in the courtyard of the estate. The main house loomed in front of her, grand and white and terrible. Standing at the top of the stairs was a man in a velvet tuxedo jacket. He was handsome in a hollow, synthetic way. His hair was perfectly coiffed, his smile white and practiced. Victor Hale. Welcome home, Elena. He said. His voice was smooth like oil. Elena stood straight. She did not cower. She did not cry. She looked him in the eye. I am not your property, she rasped, her throat dry. Victor walked down the stairs. He stopped in front of her, looking her over with the detached interest of a collector inspecting a damaged painting. You have caused quite a stir, my dear. The Moretti family was very apologetic about the inconvenience. It seems they value our partnership more than they value your freedom. He reached out and touched her chin. Elena jerked her head away. Victor smiled. Feisty. I like that. It will make breaking you again so much more entertaining. Take her to the East Wing. He ordered the guards. The Platinum Suite. I have guests arriving in an hour. We need to make sure she looks the part. The room was beautiful. That was the horror of Halcyon. It was not a dungeon. It was a 5-star hotel suite. There was a 4-poster bed with silk sheets, a vase of fresh white lilies on the marble vanity, a balcony that overlooked the dark, sprawling forest. But the windows were made of reinforced plexiglass. The door had no handle on the inside, and there were cameras in the corners of the ceiling, their red lights blinking slowly. Elena stood in the center of the room. She was still wearing her jeans and the sweater she had fled the safe house in. She walked to the window. She pressed her palm against the cold surface, below, on the terrace. She could see cars arriving, expensive cars, men in tuxedos. Women in gowns who looked too young and too frightened. She could hear the faint sound of jazz music drifting up from the ballroom. It was happening all over again. Tears finally spilled over. Hot and fast, she leaned her forehead against the glass. "Luca," she whispered into the dark, "do not come for me. Please, save yourself." But deep down, in the place where her heart beat the strongest, she knew he was coming. She could feel it. She remembered the way his body had covered hers on the floor of the safe house. She remembered the fire in his eyes when he promised to burn the world for her. He was coming, and she prayed that when he arrived, there would be enough of her left to recognize him. Until then, she scanned the room, looking for a weapon, a shard of glass, a heavy lamp, anything. She was not the same girl who had run away 6 months ago. She was Elena Ward. She had saved a mafia boss's life. She had been loved by him. If they wanted to touch her again, they were going to have to bleed for it. The warehouse smelled of diesel fuel, rust, and the metallic tang of impending violence. It was located in the industrial district, a graveyard of forgotten manufacturing plants where shadows stretched long and deep, even at midday. Inside, the only light came from a single overhead bulb swinging gently above a rusted metal table. Luca Moretti stood at the head of the table. He had traded his suit for tactical gear, black cargo pants, a heavy Kevlar vest, and boots that made no sound on the concrete floor. Spread out before him were the blueprints of the Ridgefield Wellness Retreat. They were detailed, marking every exit, every security camera, and every guard station. Around him stood 6 men. These were not the usual foot soldiers who collected protection money. These were the loyalists, the men who had served under him since before he was the boss. Men who owed him their lives and their fortunes. Marco was there, his lips split and swollen from Luca's earlier rage, his eyes cast down but his posture resolute. "This is not a negotiation," Luca said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. It lacked the usual cadence of command. Instead, it had the flat, hollow tone of a man who had already accepted his own death. "We are not going in to make a deal. We are not going in to send a message." He placed a finger on the map, pressing down hard enough to whiten the nail. "We are going in to erase it." He looked up, meeting the eyes of each man in turn. "Salvatore has betrayed us. He has aligned the family with Halcyon. By doing this tonight, we are declaring war on the Moretti elders. If we fail, we die. If we succeed, we are outcasts. There is no coming back from this. If anyone wants to walk away, the door is open. No one moved." The silence in the warehouse was heavy, filled only by the distant hum of the city outside. "We are with you, boss," one of the men said quietly. Luca nodded once. "Good. The objective is simple. We cut the power at the substation 2 miles out. We breach the perimeter here, at the north wall. Marco, you take the team to the basement holding cells. Clear them out. Anyone who resists gets put down." He traced a line to the main house. "I am going for the east wing. I am getting Elena. And then we burn the rest to the ground." The men dispersed to check their weapons, the sounds of magazines clicking into place filling the air before they left. Luca drove one last time to the safe house. He told himself he needed to retrieve a specific cache of ammunition stored there, but that was a lie. He needed to see the ghost. The house was dark and cold. The wind still whistled through the boarded-up window where the bullets had shattered the glass. Luca walked into the living room. He stood in the spot where he had held Elena on the floor, where her heart had beaten against his back like a frantic drum. He reached out and traced the jagged hole in the plaster wall where a bullet had lodged. It was a scar on the house, just as this night would be a scar on his soul. "If they take me, I won't come back." Her whisper echoed in his mind, louder than the storm of thoughts raging in his head. She had said it with such absolute, terrified certainty. She knew what breaking felt like, and she knew she did not have the pieces left to be put back together a second time. Luca closed his eyes. For years, he had told himself that he was a soldier, that violence was just a tool, a language he spoke because he had to. But standing in the wreckage of the only safety he had tried to provide, he admitted the truth. This was not about honor. It was not about correcting a business mistake. It was not even about revenge. It was about the terrifying realization that the world without Elena Ward in it was a world he refused to inhabit. He could not imagine a future where she was gone. The thought was a black void that swallowed everything else. He opened his eyes. The hesitation was gone. The fear was gone. All that was left was a cold, white-hot clarity. He turned and walked out the door, leaving the ghost behind. He was going to get the girl. 40 miles north, the Ridgefield Wellness Retreat was glowing like a jewel in the darkness of the forest. The main house was illuminated by soft, golden floodlights that highlighted the white pillars and the impeccable landscaping. Expensive cars lined the circular driveway. Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, Ferrari inside the east wing. Elena Ward stood in front of a full-length mirror. She barely recognized the reflection staring back at her. Her hair had been washed and styled into elegant waves that cascaded over her shoulders. Her face had been painted, the bruise on her cheek expertly concealed under layers of expensive foundation. She was wearing a gown of emerald green silk that hugged every curve of her body. The back cut low, the fabric shimmering under the recessed lighting. She looked beautiful. She looked expensive. She looked like a product. Victor Hale stood behind her, adjusting the diamond necklace he had clasped around her throat. His hands were cold and dry. "Exquisite," he murmured, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "You clean up so well. Elena, it is a shame you have such a rebellious streak. It ruins the aesthetic." Elena did not flinch. She did not pull away. She stood perfectly still, her breathing shallow and controlled. "I am not wearing this for you," she said. Her voice was steady, surprising even herself. Victor laughed softly. "You are wearing it because I told you to. Tonight is a celebration, a reaffirmation of our partnerships, and you are the guest of honor. Proof that Halcyon always reclaims its investments." He took her arm, his grip firm enough to bruise. "Come, our guests are waiting." He led her out of the room, down the long corridor lined with plush carpet that muffled their footsteps. Elena kept her head up. Her eyes darted left and right, scanning. She noted the position of the cameras. She counted the guards standing at the intersections. 2 at the stairwell, 1 by the elevator, all armed, though their weapons were concealed under tailored suit jackets. She was not a victim this time. She was a survivor behind enemy lines. She was memorizing the map. They emerged onto a wide balcony that overlooked the main ballroom. Below, 100 people mingled, holding crystal flutes of champagne. The air was filled with the murmur of polite conversation and the soft strains of a string quartet playing in the corner. It was a scene of perfect, opulent civilization, and every single person down there knew exactly what paid for the champagne. Victor kept a tight grip on her arm as he navigated toward a private alcove where 2 men were waiting. Elena felt her stomach drop. She knew the man on the left. It was Salvatore Moretti. He looked exactly like he had in the photos Luca had shown her. Distinguished, elderly, with a face that seemed carved from old leather. He was holding a glass of red wine, looking relaxed and jovial. "Victor," Salvatore said, smiling broadly, "and this must be the famous Elena." Elena stared at him. This was Luca's blood. This was the man who had sat at a table and decided her life was worth less than a monthly consulting fee. She felt a wave of nausea, but she swallowed it down. She stood taller. "Salvatore," Victor said, bowing his head slightly. "Thank you for coming. I believe this concludes our little misunderstanding." Salvatore looked at Elena. His eyes were devoid of empathy. He looked at her the way a butcher looks at a side of beef, assessing the quality and the weight. "She looks well," Salvatore said. "My nephew has a dramatic flair. I'm afraid he gets it from his mother. Emotional. But business is business." He took a sip of his wine. "We have transferred the assets you requested. Victor, the construction contracts are signed. The union problems downtown will disappear by Monday." "Excellent," Victor said. "And in return..." Halcyon remains committed to the Moretti family's privacy. Elena felt like she was going to scream. They were talking about her. They were trading her life for union contracts and construction deals. She looked at Salvatore. "Does he know?" she asked. Her voice cut through the polite atmosphere like a knife. "Does Luca know you are here?" Salvatore's smile tightened at the edges. "My nephew is currently mourning his mistake, my dear. He will be angry for a while, then he will be practical. That is how the world works. Kings do not go to war for pawns." He turned back to Victor, dismissing her entirely. "Now, about the shipment arriving next week." The phone in Salvatore's pocket buzzed. It was a short, sharp sound. Salvatore frowned. He pulled the device out of his jacket pocket. "Excuse me," he muttered. He looked at the screen. Elena watched his face. She saw the exact moment the arrogance evaporated. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened slightly. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking gray and old. "What is it?" Victor asked, sensing the shift. Salvatore turned the phone around. It was a photograph. It was grainy, taken in low light, but the subject was unmistakable. It was Luca. He was standing in front of the main gate of Ridgefield. He was not wearing a suit. He was wearing a tactical vest, and behind him were 5 men holding automatic rifles. The caption below the photo was just a timestamp. 1 minute ago. "He is here," Salvatore whispered. The glass of wine trembled in his hand. Victor frowned, leaning closer. "Who?" "Luca," Salvatore said, his voice rising in panic. "He's not here to negotiate. Victor, look at him. He is here to kill us." Elena looked at the photo. She saw the rage in Luca's posture. She saw the way he held his weapon. A fierce, wild hope flared in her chest, so hot it almost burned. Victor grabbed his radio from his belt. "Security, we have a breach at the main gate, Sector 4. Before he could finish the sentence, the world went black. The floodlights outside died. The chandeliers in the ballroom flickered and went out. The music stopped abruptly with a screech of feedback. For a second, there was absolute silence. The darkness was heavy and sudden. Then, the emergency lights kicked in. They were not soft white. They were a harsh, throbbing red, casting long, bloody shadows across the walls. Sirens began to blare, a deafening, rhythmic wail that made the floor vibrate. "Security to the east wing!" Victor screamed into his radio. "Lock it down! Crack!" The sound of a gunshot shattered the night. It came from the front of the house, then another, and another. A burst of automatic fire that ripped through the polite silence of the estate. The guests below began to scream. The stampede started. Salvatore dropped his wineglass. It shattered on the marble floor, red liquid pooling like blood. "He's going to kill us all." Salvatore whimpered. Victor grabbed Elena's arm, his fingers digging into her bicep hard enough to tear the silk. "Get her to the basement," he shouted to the guard standing by the door. "If they want her, they will have to dig her out of the ashes." The guard, a massive man with a thick neck, lunged forward. He grabbed Elena by the hair and yanked her back. "Move!" the guard roared. Elena did not scream. She did not beg. She fought. She spun around, driving the heel of her stiletto into the guard's instep. He grunted, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. Elena twisted away, her silk dress tearing with a loud rip. She raked her fingernails across his face, aiming for his eyes. "You bitch!" the guard shouted. He backhanded her. The blow knocked her sideways. She slammed into the wall, her head cracking against the plaster. Stars exploded in her vision. The taste of copper filled her mouth. She slid down the wall, dazed. The guard reached down and grabbed her by the ankle. He began to drag her across the floor toward the service elevator. "No!" Elena gasped. She kicked at him with her free leg. She clawed at the carpet, her fingernails breaking. "I am not going back." She grabbed the leg of a heavy console table, wrapping her arms around it, holding on with everything she had. "Let go!" the guard yelled, pulling harder. Gunfire was getting closer. It was in the hallway now, loud, deafening. Suddenly, the double doors at the end of the balcony exploded inward. Splinters of wood flew through the red-lit air. A figure stepped through the debris. He was a silhouette against the flashing red lights. He moved with terrifying speed. The guard looked up, reaching for his weapon. He was too slow. Luca Moretti did not slow down. He did not speak. He raised his rifle and fired 2 shots. The guard's head snapped back. He crumpled to the floor, releasing Elena's ankle. Luca scanned the balcony. He saw Salvatore cowering in the corner. He saw Victor Hale running through the side exit, and then he saw her. Elena was huddled against the wall, her dress torn, blood trickling from her lip, her chest heaving. Luca dropped his rifle. It clattered to the floor, forgotten. He crossed the distance in 2 strides. He fell to his knees in front of her. Elena? She looked up. Her eyes were wide, dilated with shock. She looked at him through the haze of pain and adrenaline. "Luca?" she whispered. He reached for her. His hands, usually so steady, were trembling violently. He cupped her jaw, his thumbs brushing away the hair that stuck to her sweaty forehead. He ran his thumb over the fresh bruise blooming on her cheekbone. His eyes were dark pools of rage and sorrow. He looked at the silk dress, the showpiece gown, and he looked at the fear in her eyes. "You told me," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "You told me you could not come back here." Elena nodded, a sob catching in her throat. "I tried to save you." Luca shook his head. He pulled her closer, his grip tightening as if he could physically fuse them together. "Then I am ending this place," he vowed. "I am burning it all." He pulled her up. She stumbled, her legs weak, but he caught her. He wrapped one arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest, and then, surrounded by the wailing sirens and the red emergency lights, he kissed her. It was not gentle. It was not polite. It was a collision. He kissed her with the desperation of a man who had stared into the abyss and almost fallen in. He kissed her to prove she was real, to prove she was alive, to prove that he had not failed her. Elena made a sound low in her throat and clung to him. Her fingers dug into the heavy Kevlar of his vest. She gripped his shoulders, feeling the solid, undeniable reality of him. He tasted of smoke and rain and violence, but he felt like home. She opened her mouth to him, deepening the kiss, matching his intensity. She felt his hand slide down her back to her waist, pulling her so close there was no air left between them. It was a promise, a possession, a declaration that no one, not Victor Hale, not Salvatore, not the devil himself, would ever touch her again. They broke apart, gasping for air, their foreheads rested against each other. "Can you move?" Luca asked, his voice rough. Elena nodded. "Yes, good," Luca said. He picked up his rifle with one hand, keeping the other firmly around her waist. "Then let's finish this." He turned toward the door where Victor had fled. His eyes were no longer human. They were fire. "Stay behind me," he commanded. Elena took a breath. She wiped the blood from her lip. She ripped the skirt of her gown to free her legs. She stepped up beside him. "No," she said. "Beside you." Luca looked at her. He saw the steel in her spine. He saw the survivor who had fought a guard with her bare hands. He nodded once. Together. The east wing of Ridgefield was a labyrinth of silk wallpaper and hidden misery. But Elena Ward knew every turn. She moved through the chaos not as a prisoner, but as a guide. Her hand gripping Luca's arm with a strength that belied her exhaustion. "This way!" She shouted over the roar of the alarms. "The service corridor is behind the tapestry." Luca did not question her. He fired 2 controlled shots down the hallway, forcing a pair of Halcyon guards to take cover behind a marble statue, then turned and followed her. Elena yanked a heavy velvet tapestry aside, revealing a flush keypad set into the wall. Her fingers flew over the buttons, a code she had memorized months ago while cleaning the floors, praying she would one day use it. The panel slid open with a hiss. Inside, the narrow passage smelled of concrete and damp earth. It was the artery used to move supplies and people without the guests ever seeing something as gauche as a delivery truck. "We need to get to the lower levels," Elena said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "That is where they keep the new arrivals. The ones who have not been broken yet." Luca stopped. He pressed a hand to his earpiece, listening to the chatter of his men fighting a war on the front lawn. "Marco." He barked into the mic. "Sector 4. The basement levels. There are holding cells. There was a burst of static. Then Marco's voice. Breathless and strained. We are pinned down at the fountain. Boss, if we move to the basement, we lose the perimeter. The police are 3 minutes out. Forget the perimeter, Luca ordered. His voice was hard, brokering no argument. Get to the basement, blow the locks, get the women out through the service tunnels. Boss, Marco argued, panic seeping into his tone. If we run them out through the tunnels, they run straight into the police lines. The women will talk. They will identify us. We will be implicated in everything. Luca looked at Elena. She was watching him, her eyes wide, waiting to see if he was truly different from the men who bought and sold souls. Do it, Luca said. Burn the anonymity. Get them out. He cut the connection. Elena let out a breath she had been holding. She reached out and touched his arm. Thank you, she whispered. Do not thank me yet, Luca said, reloading his weapon with a sharp metallic click. We still have to kill the head of the snake. They moved deeper into the house, bypassing the gunfights that raged in the main foyer. Elena led him up a back stairwell, her bare feet silent on the metal steps, the torn hem of her emerald gown trailing behind her like a battle flag. The control room was on the 3rd floor. It was the nerve center of the estate, the place where Victor Hale watched his guests on a wall of monitors. When they reached the heavy oak doors, Luca did not bother with the handle. He kicked the lock mechanism with a force that splintered the wood, and the doors swung open with a violent crash. Inside, the room was bathed in the red glow of the emergency lights. A bank of monitors flickered on the far wall, showing scenes of carnage across the estate. Victor Hale stood behind a massive desk, frantically stuffing hard drives into a briefcase. Salvatore Moretti stood by the window, peering out at the flashing lights of the approaching police cruisers, looking like a man whose world was dissolving. Both men froze as Luca entered. "Luca," Salvatore said, holding up his hands. His voice was trembling. "Put the gun down. We can still fix this. We can fly out. The helicopter is on the roof." Luca stepped into the room, his weapon raised. Elena walked in beside him. She did not hide behind him. She stood tall, her chin lifted, staring at the 2 men who had orchestrated her nightmare. There was no fixing this. "Uncle," Luca said, "the only thing leaving this room is the truth." Victor snapped the briefcase shut. He sneered, his composure cracking to reveal the rot underneath. "You are a fool. Moretti, you are throwing away an empire. You are destroying a legacy that took 50 years to build. And for what? For a broken girl who was sold for gambling debts?" Elena flinched at the words, but she did not look away. "She is not broken," Luca said softly. Salvatore took a step forward. "Luca, listen to reason. Family comes before everything. That is the code. That is who we are. You do not destroy your own blood for a stranger." Luca looked at his uncle. He looked at the man who had taught him how to tie a tie and how to shoot a gun. He saw nothing but a stranger in an expensive suit. He reached out and took Elena's hand. He interlaced his fingers with hers, feeling the dirt and the sweat and the warmth of her skin. "She is my family now," Luca said. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Luca felt the truth of them settle in his chest. It was a shock to hear it aloud, but it was the only thing that made sense. Victor snarled. Enough of this melodrama. He reached under the desk. Luca saw the movement. "Drop it!" Victor pulled a handgun. He did not aim at Luca. He aimed at a cluster of red fuel drums stacked in the corner of the room, emergency generator fuel that had been brought up during the power outage. "If I burn, we all burn!" Victor screamed. He fired. The bullet sparked off the metal rim of the top drum. The lid blew off, and the fumes ignited instantly. There was a whoosh of heat that knocked the breath out of them. A wall of orange fire erupted in the corner of the room, licking up the curtains and racing across the polished floorboards where the fuel had spilled. Smoke, black and oily, filled the air instantly. Salvatore screamed as the heat drove him back. Victor used the distraction. He lunged across the desk, raising his gun toward Luca. Luca was blinded by the smoke. He raised his arm to shield his face. Coughing, Elena saw the movement. She saw the glint of Victor's gun through the haze. She saw him taking aim at Luca's chest. She did not think. She did not hesitate. On the floor, near the door, was the gun the guard had dropped earlier. Elena dove for it, her hand closed around the cold metal grip. It was heavy, heavier than she expected. She rolled onto her back, ignoring the heat that singed her hair. She lifted the weapon. Her hands were shaking violently, but her eyes were clear. She saw Victor. She saw the man who had ordered her to smile while he sold her. She pulled the trigger. The recoil jarred her shoulder. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Victor Hale jerked. The gun flew from his hand. He stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, blood blooming dark against his velvet jacket. Luca spun around. He saw Elena on the floor, the gun still raised, smoke drifting from the barrel. He looked at Victor, then back at her. Pride, fierce and wild, surged through him. The fire was spreading fast now. The heat was unbearable. The monitors on the wall began to melt, plastic dripping like wax. "We have to go," Luca shouted. He grabbed Elena, pulling her to her feet. Salvatore was cowering in the corner, shielding his face. "Help me! Luca, help me!" Luca looked at his uncle. The path to the door was clear for him. "Get out," Luca said. "If you can run, run, but I am not carrying you." He turned to Victor. Victor was trying to crawl toward the private exit behind the desk, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Luca walked over to him. He grabbed Victor by the collar of his jacket and dragged him across the room. "No!" Victor shrieked. "No!" Luca dragged him to the doorway. He forced him to look out into the hallway, where the fire was already consuming the silk wallpaper and the expensive art. "Look at it," Luca hissed. "Look at your kingdom." The floor beneath them groaned. The structure was failing. Luca shoved Victor backward. He did not shoot him. He did not give him the mercy of a quick end. He let go, and Victor stumbled back, collapsing against the burning wall. "I will burn that place down," Luca had said. He turned his back on the screaming man and grabbed Elena's hand. "Run!" They burst out of the front doors of the estate, just as the roof of the east wing collapsed inward with a sound like thunder. The night air was freezing, but the heat from the inferno behind them was so intense it felt like a physical weight pushing them forward. The sky above was lit a terrifying, apocalyptic orange. Ash fell like black snow, coating the pristine lawns. Elena stumbled, her legs finally giving out. She fell onto the grass, gasping for air, her lungs burning from the smoke. Luca was there instantly. He dropped to his knees and pulled her into his arms. Elena's dress was ruined, torn to shreds and streaked with soot. Her face was black with ash, her hair wild. Luca's shirt was burned, his tactical vest discarded, blood seeping through the bandages on his shoulder where the wound had reopened. But they were alive. Luca cradled the back of her head, pressing his lips to her temple. He held her tight, anchoring himself to the earth, anchoring himself to her. "I got you," he rasped. "I got you." Around them, the chaos was absolute. Dozens of women, wrapped in blankets and coats, were streaming out of the service tunnels, guided by Luca's men who were now vanishing into the woods before the police could secure the perimeter. Blue and red lights flashed everywhere. Ambulances, fire trucks, SWAT vans. The noise was a cacophony of sirens and shouting. "FBI! Drop your weapons! Get on the ground!" A squad of agents in windbreakers swarmed the lawn, guns drawn. Luca did not let go of Elena. He stayed on his knees, his hands raised slowly in the air, shielding her body with his own. One agent stepped forward. It was Miller. He looked at the burning house, then at Luca, and finally at Elena. "Moretti," Miller said, lowering his weapon slightly. "You just started a war." Luca looked at him calmly. "I finished one." Miller signaled for his team to move in. He looked at Elena. "Miss Ward, you are safe now. We can get you out of here. But we need to process everyone, including him." He gestured to Luca. Elena pulled away from Luca's chest. She stood up. Her legs were shaky, but she locked her knees. She wiped the soot from her face, leaving a streak of clean skin. She stepped between Luca and the agent. She reached down and took Luca's hand. She gripped it hard, intertwining her fingers with his. "I am not going anywhere without him," Elena said. "Elena." Her voice was raspy from the smoke, but it carried over the roar of the fire. Miller sighed. Elena, he's a crime boss. He just burned down a historic estate. He has to answer for this. I will testify, Elena said. The words stopped Miller cold. I will give you everything, she continued. I will tell you about the trafficking. I will tell you about the senators who visited. I will tell you about the money laundering. I will give you the dates, the names, the account numbers I saw in Victor's office. I will give you Halcyon on a silver platter. She squeezed Luca's hand, but I will not say a word that leads to him. She met Luca's eyes. They were clear, unwavering, filled with a love that had been forged in the fire behind them. If you touch him, Elena said, turning back to Miller. I saw nothing, I know nothing, and Victor Hale's lawyers will have me out on a lack of evidence by morning. Miller looked at her. He looked at the determination in her eyes. He looked at the burning building that had been a stain on his jurisdiction for years, a stain he had never been able to clean. He looked at Luca, who remained on his knees, looking up at Elena with something akin to worship. Miller holstered his gun. Get him out of here, Miller muttered, turning his back. I did not see him, but if I ever see him in my city again, I will bury him. Elena nodded. She pulled Luca to his feet. Let's go, she whispered. They turned and walked away from the fire, hand in hand, disappearing into the shadows of the tree line as the empire of Halcyon burned to ash behind them. The motel was 3 hours west, a roadside relic with a neon sign that buzzed with the sound of a dying insect. The room smelled of lemon polish and stale cigarettes, but the sheets were clean, and the door had a heavy deadbolt. It was the most beautiful place Elena had ever seen. They lay on the narrow bed, fully clothed, facing each other in the dim light filtering through the thin curtains. They had scrubbed the soot from their skin in the tiny bathroom, the water turning black as it swirled down the drain, but the smell of smoke still lingered in their hair. Elena reached out. Her fingers were clean now, though her nails were broken. She traced the lines of the fresh bandages Luca had wrapped around his chest. She watched the way his muscles tensed beneath her touch, the tiny hitch in his breathing when she skimmed over a tender spot. He was a map of scars, and she was learning to read every one of them. You are hurting, she murmured. I am fine, Luca said. His voice was a low rumble in the quiet room. He reached up and cupped her face. His hand was large, warm, and infinitely gentle. He treated her like she was made of glass, but looking at her now, he knew she was made of something much stronger. Iron, diamond, fire. He ran his thumb over the curve of her jaw, memorizing the softness at the corner of her mouth. We can never go back to Ravenshore, he said quietly. I know, Elena said. My accounts are frozen. My assets will be seized. Salvatore, if he survived, he will put a price on my head. Elena shifted closer. She tucked herself under his arm, resting her leg over his. It was an intimate, casual gesture that spoke of a lifetime of comfort compressed into a few hours. I do not care about the money, Luca. I do not know how to be anything else, he admitted. The confession hung in the air. I have been a soldier since I was a child. I do not know how to live in a world without walls. Elena smiled faintly. She touched her forehead to his. We will learn, she whispered. We will get new names. We will go somewhere where it does not rain every day. I will get a job that does not involve serving coffee to men with guns, and you can learn to build things instead of burning them down. Luca closed his eyes, breathing in her scent. It was no longer fear and adrenaline. It was hope. I can't go back there, Elena whispered, echoing the words she had said to him that first night in the diner. Luca opened his eyes. He looked at her, and the shadows that had haunted him for 30 years seemed to recede. As long as we are together, he said, his voice firm with a new kind of vow. There does not exist anymore. He kissed her then. It was slow, soft. It tasted of cheap toothpaste and freedom. There is only where we decide to go next. Thank you so much for listening to I Can't Go Back There. She pleaded, the Mafia boss said. Then I'll burn that place down. I hope you enjoyed this story of survival, redemption, and love found in the darkest of places. If this story moved you, please leave a comment down below telling me where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Do not forget to hit that subscribe button to join the Mafia romance stories family so you never miss a new episode. Share your thoughts in English in the comments. Did Luca do the right thing by burning it all down? Would you have made the same choice as Elena? I cannot wait to read your answers. Until next time.